Michelangelo, can you hear me? Y'all let me know if my audio is on. So I just had to update the title, sorry. It always takes the previous stream's title, but today we're doing office hours. Y'all are welcome to ask questions. I'm going to start things off with talking about how to read JavaScript documentation. We're just going to go over a little example with the Mozilla Developer Network documentation for the array map method. So y'all let me know in the chat if you can hear me okay, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, cool. Sounds like y'all can hear me okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get into it. So this is Mozilla Developer Network. This is likely the place that you'll go whenever you have questions about JavaScript, especially front-end JavaScript. And so they've got everything that you need to know about HTML, CSS, client-side JavaScript. And so a lot of the client-side stuff applies to Node as well. Of course, you can use all these methods like the array methods, string methods, number methods, object methods, etc. And so in this example, just assume that you are trying to figure out how the .map method works for arrays. And so somehow you find your way to this page, and you go through and you look at the example here, and that's all great. And as you're going down, you see the syntax, and you start seeing some syntax within the syntax that is a little bit foreign to you, like this open bracket here at the end of the argument name, and then another open bracket, and then two closing brackets, and then again here we have some more brackets. So this is the kind of thing that, in my opinion, when you're starting out, you see something like this and it's just kind of mind-boggling. It's a little confusing. It's not something you've seen before, and so it causes your brain to shut down, and you're just like, oh, I don't understand this. And you get stuck, right? You came here to try to figure out one thing, you see something else that doesn't make any sense, so then you just abandon it. And maybe you don't find the answer to the thing that you're looking for to begin with because of this block. So that's what this video is about, this portion of it. I'm just going to try to explain to you this particular thing, and then kind of a strategy that you can use for figuring this sort of stuff out. So the strategy, we'll start with that first, is just that you just got to keep reading, okay? So don't just look at this code example and think, I don't understand this. Keep reading through the documentation, line by line. I know with our attention spans the way they are these days, and everybody TikToking and YouTube and everything, it's hard to just stop and read a bunch of text that's in your face. But if you read, the more you understand. So in this case, they show you the demo of, like, here's an array, and here's an example of using the .map. Okay, so if that doesn't help you understand it, then they actually break down the syntax. They say, here's an example of the syntax, and then here's a breakdown under parameters of all the parameters within the syntax. So the first thing here, there's two arguments to the .map method. The first one is this callback. The second one is this arg. Okay, so you have the callback, and if you see it's lined up perfectly with this arg. And then within the callback, you have more arguments. So you have current value, index, and array. And so you can see it's indented, and then here's current value, here's index, here's array. Okay, so the current value is required. If you're going to call array.map and you have your callback as the first argument, then you have to put in the current value. The callback is required, and then the current value argument is required. That's the bare minimum. Now, you'll have this open bracket, and then you have its closing bracket right here, and then you have these two things inside of it with their commas to separate them from the other arguments. So what that means is that everything inside the brackets is optional. And so if you look down here, you can see that both the index argument and the array argument are optional. Also, you have another set of brackets, and again, it's the same thing. It means that array is optional. So not only is index optional, so you can do index or array, or you can do index and array. So they're both optional. So you can do one or the other or both. And so you can do the current value, and you can do the index, or you can do the current value, the index, and the array. One thing that's tricky here, though, is that you can't do current value and then just the array. If you have current value, whatever the second argument is, it's implied that that second argument is going to be the index. So if you were to call it array, it would still point to the index of the element for the array during that iteration of the loop. So current value is required, index is optional, array is optional, but if you include it, you also have to include the index. And so that's kind of denoted by the way things are bracketed. Say both these are optional, or this last one is optional, but then the one before it is required if you want to use it. Okay, so then what the heck is going on with this arg, right? The second argument to the .map method. Remember, these three were arguments for the callback that goes inside of the .map, which is the first argument. So the second one is this arg. And so if you go down, it even tells you, like, okay, so the callback, which is this guy right here, that's a function that's called for every element of the array. Each time the callback executes, the return value is added to the new array, which is this variable that we're assigning the result of this whole thing to. Okay, then it goes down, it says the callback function accepts the following arguments. You have your current value, the current element being processed in the array. But again, that's required, even though they don't tell you that. And then the index is optional. So the index is that second one. It's the index of the current element being processed in the array. And then the array is the array that map was called upon. So it's this. And so technically you can just call the ARR variable, but if for whatever reason you're using another variable inside the scope of this thing called ARR, then you can just use this third argument here, which you can call it array, or you can call it whatever you want. So this documentation, if you read through it, you may be able to, everything I just explained to you, you may be able to read through this and say, okay, that's what's happening. But if for whatever reason you got kind of a mind block, hopefully this video helps. The other thing is you can always ask on Stack Overflow. That's how I figured this out originally, is I went and I asked for help. Okay, so that brings us to the second argument for .map, and that is this arg. And so that's the value to use as this when executing the callback. Okay, so inside the callback, you can access the variable this, and that is what this arg is. You can put an object there, and that object will be referenced with the this keyword inside of the callback. Again, it's optional. You don't have to use that if you don't want to. So that's what the brackets mean. It means this argument's optional, these two are optional, or keep this one, but this one's optional. Okay, so that's it. Hopefully seeing someone like take a minute to break this stuff down helps you better understand what this syntax is, because the syntax itself has its own syntax, which is kind of confusing because not a lot of people copy that or cover that. And so every single one of these methods, if you go through .for each, you scroll down, here it is again, right? So now it's familiar to you. So you say, oh yeah, I know what that means. And you can go through any different method. These are all just for the arrays. There's more for objects and strings and everything else. But as you encounter this with the arguments, you can understand what is optional. And then anything that's not optional, obviously it's implied that it's required. Okay, so jumping back over to the chat, let's see, people just saying that they can hear me. So yeah, let me know in the chat if this sort of thing is useful to you. I'm gonna start scheduling regular office hours, as meaning like, I'm not gonna give any definitive amount of time right now, but just for an example, let's just say like once a week or twice a week, I'll be available for like an hour. And I'll try to do it at varying times so that I'm covering different people's time zones. So if you feel like something like that is available to you, or is useful to you, where you can come into the chat and you can say, hey, I need help with this question, right? And then I'll do my best to answer it. Let me know in the chat, and we'll definitely, if I get a good enough response for this sort of thing, then I'll try to make it a more regular thing. Also, if you're not already over in the Discord group for the Web Developer Bootcamp, I'm starting to do office hours over there as well in the audio channel, which allows you to do screen sharing, video sharing, everything like that. And you can come in and use your microphone and actually ask me a question, whereas here on YouTube, you just get to type it into the chat. Over there, you can interact with me back and forth and engage with other members of the community at the same time. So if you think that sort of thing is going to be useful or helpful to you, just let me know in the chat. It's 2:36 now. I already did like 20 minutes or so over in the Discord, so I'll do like another 10-15 minutes or so here. If you have any questions about anything coding related, career related, anything like that, or you just want to say what's up, give me a shout out in the chat, and I'll see if I can't get you answered before the time is up. Thanks. I don't have anything cool to put on the screen. I should probably get like a green screen or something. That way, or I need another monitor so that you don't have to stare at this page right here. But it is what it is. All right, Michelangelo is saying that it is very useful. That's good to know. Appreciate that. Does anybody have any questions? I know there's only 5 or 6 of you in here right now, but if you have any questions, please let me know. Looks like Abhishek has to go to sleep. Kind of wish I was taking a nap right now. Tired. If anybody has any questions, ask them in the chat. Be happy to help you out. I'm gonna cut this off real quick and just want to show you all. See if I can find it. All right, so if you're ever on my community wall over here on YouTube, sometimes I'll be asking like questions and polls. So here's one I have right now. If you haven't answered it, go ahead and check it out. It's what is the hardest part about learning to code? And it looks like right now, currently, the majority of people are saying the most difficult part, at least from these 5 options that I made available. There may be other things that I wasn't thinking of. But the most difficult part of learning to code apparently is staying motivated. And then the next most difficult thing is knowing what to learn. And then the third in line was finding answers to questions. And then a very small percentage was learning the syntax and lacking accountability. Staying motivated. So we could talk about that. It's interesting because it depends on what your driving factors are, right? Like, I'm going to jump back over here just in case anybody has any questions. Okay, cool. So I'm actually going to pump the brakes on going over the poll. We'll get back to that in a second. Michelangelo asked a question. For someone like me that's just started, is it a good idea to start a project as soon as possible after I have the basics? Absolutely. So I don't want to say the more projects you're working on, because I don't want you to think that you should be working on multiple projects and then like spreading yourself thin, because you don't want to do that. You want to focus on like one thing at a time, get it done, go to the next thing. But the question is it a good idea to start a project as soon as possible after you have the basics? Yes, because in my opinion, project-based learning is one of the best ways to learn. If you have a project with some criteria and you give yourself a deadline and you know this is what it's supposed to look like, and you go through the planning phase and then you execute and you start working on it and you run into the bugs and the problems and then you go find the answers to those things, that all those processes are going to help you become a better developer. They're going to help you figure out how to ask questions on Stack Overflow or on Google or DuckDuckGo or whatever you're using for search engine. You know, how to find stuff online, how to find a mentor, how to get help from others, how to engage in communities like YouTube or Discord. So the more quickly you get to starting a project, the better. Multiple projects, I don't think I would encourage that. Maybe 2 maximum, but I would try to stay focused. Don't multitask. I mean, if you're doing something for work, which if you have a job, that's great, and you want to do something on the side to like continue your education, like maybe work is work, you know, but it's not super interesting and you want to do something that's a little more personal, then 2 projects is great. But if you're just still learning, then maybe just stick to 1 project at a time. See that project all the way through, you know, and you may pivot here and there and change it, but still stick with that 1 project until you decide that it's done, and then move on to the next one. So hopefully that answers your question. So jumping back over to the poll about what the hardest part about learning the code is, staying motivated part, which is interesting to me that so many people voted up. I mean, there's 109 people, so it's not a ton of people, but it's enough. Enough people are saying that they're having difficulty staying motivated. So I guess at that point you have to ask yourself like your reasons, like your why for what you're doing. Why are you learning to code? Because I think a lot of people get into coding because they hear that software developers make a lot of money, which is not a terrible, reason to do something. That's a big part of the reason why I started doing software development, is because I wanted to make more money to support the lifestyle that I had at the time, which was basically not working and just surfing every day. But I need to pay my bills, and I need to put food on the table and all that. So you have to ask yourself a question like, why am I doing this? Is it just because I want to learn something new? Is it because I'm excited about programming? It's sparks my creativity. Is there something you want to solve? Is there something that requires coding or the ability to build a web application, and without the knowledge of coding, you can't solve that thing or create that thing? So I think having goals and knowing why you're doing what you're doing is what will help you kind of get out of bed, stay focused, and stay motivated, because there's different sides of coding. There's the parts where you're learning something and it's new and it's novel and it's exciting, and then there's the parts where it's hard and it's kind of boring. And so that, I think, those peaks and valleys where you get down into a valley and you're this is difficult, it's boring, I can't find the answers I'm looking for, I keep getting this error, I haven't even set up my local environment yet because of all the difficulties you're running into. Easy to give up at that point, or just to lack motivation. And so if you don't have the reason, the overarching this is what is motivating me to learn to code, then you don't know the answer to that question, then it's going to be difficult to pull yourself out of those lows. So stop what you're doing and ask yourself, why am I doing this? Why did I get into it to begin with? And if you don't know why, if you just did it on a whim, that's fine too. But maybe find something. Am I trying to build a project? Am I trying to work for a startup or a big corporation? Or is it because I need more money? Is it because I like creating things because I want to be a creator, a content creator, or build my own web app, or create my own community? Once you have the answers to those questions, it'll be easier, in my opinion, for you to stay motivated. So make sure you answer those questions before you get started, or if you're already started and you're down in the dumps, then take a minute to figure out the answer to that kind of thing. No problem, Michelangelo. Appreciate you coming on and asking questions. Those of you that are just getting here, I noticed we got a couple more of you coming in. You can watch the playback of this for the advice I gave on reading JavaScript documentation. I also have an edited video already that I recorded a little while ago when I was doing the same office hours type thing for the Discord server, which I'll link the Discord server in the description for this video. So for those of you that are not already engaging in that community, feel free to come over and join us. We'd be happy to have you. We're going to be doing office hours like this here on YouTube, but also over on Discord. So whatever style you appreciate more, you can get involved that way. If anybody has any more questions, let me know in the chat. I'll be happy to answer them before I get out of here. We just covered the answers to this poll that I created about what the hardest part about learning to code is. Obviously, this is kind of a limited scope. Someone's at my front door. I'll be right back. That was the Dish Network guy. Had the wrong address. Okay. So, going back to this poll over on the community wall for this channel, asking what the hardest part of learning to code is, we covered staying motivated. The second most difficult thing that people are experiencing from these 5 options is knowing what to learn. So, that is tricky. If you're going to be a web developer, then you absolutely have to know HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. So make sure that you have those under your belt and know them well. You don't have to be an expert, and by any means, but you should definitely understand two things. You should understand the absolute basics, and then you should also understand how to find answers to the things that you're looking for. So there's documentation, Mozilla Developer Network. I've got this open over here for JavaScript. There's documentation for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for anything and everything you could ever ask. It's there already. So you should be able to find the answers to any of the questions that you have. Anything that you can't find on the Mozilla Developer Network, you can always get answers to on Stack Overflow. Most of those questions have already been asked if it's something like fundamental. But if it's more advanced, there's probably someone out there that can help you get the answer to it. So in terms of knowing what to learn, if you're going to be a web developer, again, you have to get the trio there under your belt, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Once you're done with that, then and you want to go on to, so that's front-end JavaScript, by the way. If you want to get on to a scripting language, something for the back end, then you have a whole plethora of options. And so that's where it can get tricky, right? You already learned the basics of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and now it's like, what do I learn next? So it can go a lot of different directions, because not only can you learn more languages, right? You can learn Ruby or Python or C, C++, C#, doesn't matter. Tons of different stuff. Flask, or not Flask, but whatever that, what do they call it? The proprietary language for Apple. It's escaping me right now, but someone can put it in the chat if they know what I'm talking about. Anyway, Flask is a framework for Python. So anyway, understanding and figuring out which language to learn can be difficult. Personally, they're not all created equal. Some are better for some things, others are better for others. So you just want to figure out what it is you're trying to do ultimately. If you're getting into something science-based or mathematics-based or stock market or whatever, then maybe Python is more your speed. If you just really like JavaScript, on the front end, then maybe you just learn Node, which is also JavaScript, on the back end. If you don't like the syntax and you're sick of all the semicolons and opening and closing brackets, maybe you go learn something like Ruby or Python. Lots of options out there. The other thing is just learning out of necessity, right? So if you want to go work for a certain company and they say, hey, we use Java, then guess what? You have to learn Java. If you want to work for that company, you have to use Java. So there's that. You can ask yourself, what company or companies do I want to work for? And then you just go find out what languages or frameworks or stacks they're using, and then you learn those things. So that's one way to figure out what to learn. They have these learning roadmaps that became popular a few years ago, where they show you, like, if you want to be a front-end developer, and then it's like this crazy tree of like this like data structure that shows all of these different topics for front-end development, and they have the same thing for back-end. So back-end, front-end together makes full stack. And you can go through there and figure out whatever it is you want to learn. There's tons of stuff to learn. So they'll tell you, like, oh, well, you got to learn, preprocessors like SAS and I forget what the one is for JavaScript. There's a couple of them, especially if you're using things like React. You use JSX syntax, and then that has to be turned into JavaScript. Or if you're using the newer ES Next or whatever, you need to take that back to like ES5. You use Babel and things like that. So there's a lot of stuff to learn. Again, I think necessity is the best way to learn. If you need it for a project or for a job or for something you're working on, then you got to learn it. So that's the easiest way, in my opinion, to figure out what to learn. So it can be super overwhelming, but stick with the basics. Get HTML, CSS, and JavaScript under your belt, and then go from there. Don't be afraid to get your feet wet. You can always pick something up and put it back down if you don't like it, right? You can try Python, you can try Ruby, and if you're like, I don't like the way this works, then whatever, do something else. So hopefully that helps you know what to learn. I know there's a lot of stuff out there, and the analogy that's always thrown around at like boot camps is like, oh, you're drinking out of a fire hose of information. So it's just an insane amount of information. So my thing is I just don't learn it unless I have to. So that's one way to do it. The other way, of course, is just you can just make a track for yourself based on these different roadmaps. Just look up, front-end developer roadmap, and you'll find the resources on whatever search engine you use. And you can do the same thing for back-end or full stack. All right, so someone is saying Michelangelo is asking me what motivated you to start coding. So let's think about this. It really just depends on how far back in time you want to go. So when I was a kid, I used to play a lot of first-person shooters, still do to a degree whenever I have time, but back then I played a lot. And so there was these like groups or teams or clans or whatever they call them for players to get together and make a team. And typically they would have like cool graphics, signatures, memes. Memes weren't really a big thing back then, but signatures were a big thing. And then like a website for people, like a forum for people to connect. So I wanted to be able to create these things. I want to be able to create the website and create the forum. And so I had to learn, again, out of necessity. Like I had a goal, I wanted to do this thing, and so I had to learn the technologies to do that. And so that's kind of what got me into, like, let's say web design, but I did some web development, I built stuff with tools, but the tools weren't necessarily coding, right? So I used a lot of like graphical user interface type tools like Microsoft Front Page, or with something like PHP where you just go through the documentation and basically you just upload this, change the configuration, and boom, it's up and running. You just log into the dashboard as an administrator, and now you have a forum and you can run it. So a lot of like content management stuff. And eventually I found WordPress, which is also a CMS, very popular, PHP-based, MySQL-based content management system, which people have, originally it was for making blogs, as everyone knows what WordPress is, but now it's, a lot of people use it for like full-on websites. And so I used that for a while to make client websites, as I kind of like switched gears and started actually trying to make money with it. And I was fairly successful with it, just getting a couple clients here and there. And so along the way, I had learned like graphic design, and so I used that to a degree, and did like some web design, combined it with web development. Anyway, so that was like my entire childhood, from like age, I don't know when I started, like 12 or something, all the way through till, like 15 or 16, 17, I don't know. And then when I started going to college, I started out as a graphic design major, and I don't know, ended up switching and doing video. And then when I graduated, I went and worked for a company as their marketing person. So I would like make videos for them, and make graphics and different marketing materials. And then I saw their website and I was like, I kind of know how to make websites. Like I know how to like take a theme, right? And then like change the words and the pictures and stuff. So I was like, I'll redo y'all's website. So I did. And once I realized like, oh, I can do this thing, I did it for other people as well. So I did that, we'll say professionally. I was paid to do it, but I wasn't the greatest at it. So I did that for a while, and then ultimately I left that job and I moved to California, and I was not doing I had clients where I was doing WordPress websites. I wasn't making a ton of money, but I was making a little bit. So I was doing that part-time. I was also driving like Sidecar and Uber and stuff. 1 second, y'all. Hello. Huh? Yeah, I'm doing a YouTube live, but I'll be there in a second. Okay, so I gotta wrap it up because I gotta go. But yeah, long story short, I was driving like Uber, and I picked someone up that had graduated from a boot camp, and they said, oh, I make a lot of money now as a software developer. And I thought, oh, money, that's good, like to help pay bills. And like, basically I was trying to like balance like surfing every day and driving for Uber. And I was like, at first I started driving a ton to like pay my bills and everything, but then I was like surfing more and more, and I wasn't making enough money because I just spent all my day out in the water. And so I thought, oh, if I just learn how to code, then I can like get back to this lifestyle of like surfing as much as I want. And anyway, I picked someone up that worked at a boot camp. They said, hey, we have a part-time program. You can learn how to code. You don't have to spend a ton of money. I think it's like $3,500 for this part-time program. You can do it in the evening, so you can still work. So I went ahead and started that, did that. And anyway, there's a lot more to the story. If y'all are interested, I can continue telling you later. I got to go right now. But basically, my motivation to answer your question, Michelangelo, was like money to a degree, but needing money to pay for the necessities so that I could go on like living the lifestyle I wanted. Anyway, so it's changed over time now. Obviously, I don't even live anywhere near an ocean or anything like that, so I don't surf anymore. But and my motivation to continue doing it has changed a little bit too. So I can talk about that more in the future. But that was a good question. Thank you. So thank you all for showing up, taking time to watch this. This live stream will be live in a little bit, so you can rewatch it if you haven't seen the whole thing. And then I'll upload a shorter video that goes over the whole reading through documentation for JavaScript on the Mozilla Developer Network. Thanks a lot for your questions. And if you like this sort of thing, you want to see more of it, please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.